Hello everybody, I'm delighted to welcome you here tonight for this special Faber members event with Alan Bennett. Tickets sold out in the blink of an eye, and so I'm especially pleased also to welcome our online audience, who are not only from every region in the UK, but as far afield as our night owl friends in Calcutta. Welcome. Faber has published Alan since his first play, 40 Years On, in 1969. And I've had the great fortune to be his editor for the last 20 years. During that time, there's been 5 plays, 2 screenplays, 2 collections of prose, a book about poetry, fiction, 2 new television plays for talking heads, and only Alan could write a diary during those dark pandemic days under the title House Arrest that becomes a Times bestseller. And so while I can't pretend there's ever been much editing, I think I can claim quite a lot of publishing. Many titles with our terrific co-publishers, Profile Books, who are here somewhere this evening. Faber moved to this magnificent old bindery in April, but I couldn't call it home until Alan had visited. Tonight is my clever way of luring him over to our new HQ, and it's no surprise that the building has been buzzing today as a result. Our publishing history is unimaginable without Alan at its heart. But I won't go on because we're here to hear Alan, who will begin with reading from his work, followed by a Q&A, so do cook up some questions. And so, Alan, over to you.
Angus Wilson was once writing in his Norfolk garden, and a woman passed with a small child. "Oh, look, Mummy," she said. "There's an old man writing." "Yes," said her mother. "It does them so much good." She might equally have said it keeps them out of mischief, though in my case I've never got into mischief really. So it's not writing that's kept me out of it. Anyway, I was born and brought up in Leeds, where my father was a butcher. And as a boy, I used to have to go out with the orders on the shop bike. One of our customers was a nice woman called Mrs. Fletcher. And Mrs. Fletcher had a daughter, Valerie, and she went to Leeds Girls High School, and then I think to a secretarial college, and then went off to London, where she got a job with a publisher's. She did well at this publisher's, and eventually became secretary and assistant to one of the directors, whom, though he was much older than she was, she eventually married. Now, the firm was Faber and Faber, and the director was T.S. Eliot. So there was a time when I thought that my only connection with literature would be that I'd once delivered chops to T.S. Eliot's mother-in-law. Sometime after this, my mother came in one day and said, "I ran into Mrs. Fletcher down the road." She wasn't with Mr. Fletcher, she was with another fellow, tall, elderly, very refined looking. She introduced me and we passed the time of day. And it wasn't until some time later that I realised that without it being one of the most momentous encounters in Western literature, my mother had met T.S. Eliot. I tried to explain to her the significance of the great poet, but the waistland didn't figure very largely in my mother's scheme of things. And I said, well, he won the Nobel Prize for Literature. And Mum said, well, I'm not surprised. It was a beautiful overcoat. Valerie Elliott used to remember that she remembered me as a boy doing my homework in a corner of the shop, an unlikely recollection and a slightly distasteful one, reminiscent of Millet's fairly odious picture of Christ in the carpenter's shop. Had I ever chosen to do my homework in the shop, it would have got short shrift from my father, who would have seen it as showing off. What Valerie Elliott did do, though, was to send me the notes T.S. Eliot had made on the inside of his programme after their visit to Beyond the Fringe, the 60 years ago, the review that first loosed me on the English theatre. An amazingly vigorous quartet of young men, their show well-produced and fast-moving, a mixture of brilliance, juvenility, and bad taste. Brilliance illustrated by a speech by Macmillan, Peter Cook, a sermon, Alan Bennett, and an interview with an African politician, Jonathan Miller, who otherwise reminded us of Auden. Juvenility by an anti-nuclear bomb scene, anti-capital punishment scene, and the absence of any satire at the expense of the Labour Party. Still, it's pleasant to see this type of entertainment so successful. I'm going to read various extracts from my diaries, but not in a chronological way, but I've slightly grouped them under headings. In 1966, my father retired and my parents left Leeds and went to live in a village north of Skipton in the Dales. And we still have the cottage, and so we're often on the train from King's Cross. And so this first category is trains. Yorkshire. A plumpish young man gets off the train at Leeds just behind me. Aren't you famous? Well, I can't be, can I, if you don't know my name? It's Alan something. Yes. From Scarborough? No. So which Alan are you? I'm another Alan. Are you just a look-alike? Well, you could say so. He pats my arm consolingly. Be happy with that. And now the next entry is to do with my partner, Rupert Thomas, who I've been been together for about 31 years. Rupert to Cardiff to see his grandmother on a potentially difficult day, as it's also the day of the Grand Slam rugby match between Wales and France. The train is very crowded, and he sits in weekend first, opposite a middle-aged French couple whom he assumes to be fans, but with nothing in their behaviour that gives any clue. However, just before the train arrives at Cardiff, this very proper bourgeois lady takes out her compact and with her lipstick carefully draws the French flag on both cheeks and colours them in. This is done so unselfconsciously and without a smile, Rupert feels that for this alone they deserve to win. I'm not giving you the dates because they aren't really relevant normally. I buy 2005. I buy a bottle of organic wine at Fresh and Wild, and looking at the label, see that it says suitable for vegetarians and vagrants. Momentarily, I think, well, that's thoughtful. Someone admitting that winos deserve consideration like everyone else, before realising, of course, it says not vagrants, but vegans. In 1997, I was found to have bowel cancer, from which I recovered but have had to have regular checkups ever since. Regular checkups for cancer sometimes turn up other problems. Looking for one thing, the doctors find another. Thus, in February, I was found to have a stomach aneurysm, and though it's my inclination to leave things as they are, it apparently needs to be seen to. Aneurysms these days are often quite straightforward, remedied with the fitting of a stent, sometimes in just a one-day job. Mine, though, is not straightforward and will need an open operation. And the surgeons who see the scans and angiograms get very excited, as if they had never seen an aneurysm in this particular spot before. You should always be careful when surgeons get excited. It generally doesn't bode well. Anyway, the operation is scheduled at UCH, and arrangements made for other doctors to observe the procedure. The surgical equivalent, I suppose, of additional priests present at a funeral or memorial service being described as robed and in the sanctuary. I am robed and ready myself today, and indeed halfway to the operating theatre, when we have to come back as the operation cannot begin until a bed becomes vacant in intensive care. In the same way, I suppose, as Concorde was never allowed to take off from Heathrow until the landing bay became vacant at JFK. The upshot is that the procedure is postponed until next Tuesday, and then the following week. A pre-operation session at the Elizabeth Garrett Anderson wing of UCH, in which Siobhan, a nice, cheerful and silly nurse, takes me through the same questionnaire I answered twice last week. She then takes me in to see the anaesthetist, and he goes through the same questionnaire. He's Scots, so everything is a wee while, a wee op, which it plainly isn't. I'm coming away a wee bit depressed, though it's slightly alleviated when Siobhan says, "I've just got one more question. Do you dye your hair?" And then, before the procedure, which ends up lasting 7 hours, there is a slightly comic scene in which the nurse goes round the various wards, gathering up the patients due to be operated on this afternoon. We're told to take a pillow with us, so clad in our hospital gowns and each clutching our pillow, we walk in single file behind the nurse across the bridge above the atrium that leads to the surgical wing. We look like medieval penitents on the way to public humiliation and an auto-da-fe. The technical description of the aneurysm is a dissection of the superior mesenteric artery. Since its location is unique, before the operation I asked the surgeon if I can give my name to this particular spot. He's not encouraging, perhaps having thoughts of that for himself. It's a pity. Bennett's dissection sounds rather good, I think, as I drift off. It might serve as a description of some of my life's work. 2004. Alan Titchmarsh, this section is to do with age and infirmity. Alan Titchmarsh rings to say that they've booked for the Habit of Art at the National, which, since it's not due to open for another 3 weeks or so, makes me slightly nervous. He says they've gone to Grantham. I say I didn't know they were planning to move. They weren't. What he'd actually said was they'd got a grandson. Such mishearings are nowadays a regular occurrence. And another one. Increasingly deaf in the friendly antique shop in Southwold, a man with a camera around his neck wants to shake my hand. I ask if he's a photographer. Only in an amateur way. Ramsgate mostly. Me. Oh, I've never been to Ramsgate. Not Ramsgate, Rupert bellows from the other end of the shop. Landscape, landscape. And it's not just mishearings, it's misseeings. 2012, en route to Leeds, we have lunch at Betty's in Ilkley, packed with people stir crazy after the Christmas holiday. We're sitting facing the car park and the row of shops beyond. Me. What's that shop called? Rupert. Which? Me. It looks to me like hot feces. Rupert. It's fat face. Between a shop calling itself Fat Face and one called Hot Feces seems a difference of degree only, with both equally mysterious. Is it a shop where one gets a fat face, hence sweets and confectionery, or an outsize shop? Neither, apparently, just a well-known fashion outlet. Still, the name seems quite odd to me, if not nearly as unlikely as what I thought it was. Keep up, I suppose, the message. And more cancer, I've heard. A routine, 2010, a routine colonoscopy, though it never is routine, with no telling what's round the next corner. Today, it's a little fairy ring of polyps, innocent enough, but ruthlessly lassoed and garroted by the radiographer, lest in 2 or 3 years' time they grow up to be the nasties he's on the lookout for, but thankfully does not find. On the way down, we pay a reverential visit to the site of my original operation, before, as he puts it, cruising down my colon. Unaccountably, this takes me back to the amusement park on the front at Morecambe in the first year of the war, when Dad took my brother, 9, and me, 6, on the Big Dipper. As Big Dippers go, it was pretty tame, though far too scary for me, who never went on it or any other again. But there was just one bit I enjoyed. When all the ups and downs were over, the train briefly coasted along a high, straight stretch behind the boarding houses and with a view over the sea, before it gently rattled down the long incline to the platform and the end of the ride. And that was what the last bit of the colonoscopy reminded me of, 70 years later. This next entry is to do with Russell Harty, who's largely forgotten now. He was someone who was at college with me, and I was a friend, and he made me laugh more than anybody else since. He always got a bad press, particularly from the Daily Mail, but anyway, that's no bad thing. Russell has been given some beta blockers, which help to suppress the symptoms of nerves and stage fright. He'd put one of them in a tissue, meaning to take it just before his TV programme. But when he came to do so, he found it had dissolved, leaving a patch on the tissue. In the hope that some effective trace of the drug remained, he sucked this patch and within a few minutes felt calmer and came through with flying colours. A second attack of nerves he dealt with in the same way. It was only on the way home after the programme had finished that he felt in another pocket and found the original tissue with the pill intact. What he'd been sucking was some snot. I used to be, I can't one of the great sadnesses of my life at the moment is I can't ride a bike anymore. But anyway, this was in the days when I did ride a bike. In the evening, I often bike round Regent's Park. Tonight, I'm mooning along the inner circle past Bedford College when a distraught woman dashes out into the road and nearly fetches me off. She and her friend have found themselves locked in and have had to climb over the gate. Her friend Murray hasn't made it. And there, laid along the top of one of the 5-barred gates, is a plump 60-year-old lady, one leg either side of the gate, bawling to her friend to hurry up. I climb over and try and assess the situation. "Good," says Mary, her cheek pressed against the gate. "I can see you're of a scientific turn of mind." Her faith in science rapidly evaporates when I try moving her leg and she yells with pain. It's at this point that we become aware of an audience. 3 Chinese in the regulation rig out of embassy officials are watching the pantomime, smiling politely and clearly not sure if this is a pastime or a predicament. Eventually, they're persuaded to line up on the other side of the gate. I hoist Mary over, and she rolls comfortably down into their outstretched arms. There's much smiling and bowing. Mary's friend said all's well that ends well. Mary says she's laddered both her stockings, and I cycle on my way. This is an entry from Yorkshire. As age weakens the bladder, I find myself having to pee more often, which, when I'm out in the country in the car, is no problem. Though like a dog or a creature marking its territory, I do find myself often choosing the same spot. One regular place of worship is a lane on the outskirts of Leeds between Arthington and Harewood. It's a nice location and of some historic interest, as in the 16th century the land belonged to an ex-Cluniac monastery that was, among the properties they included Kirkstall Abbey, granted to Archbishop Thomas Cranmer on the death of Henry VIII. It wasn't actually included in the royal will, but was part of the general share-out that occurred then to fulfil the wishes supposedly expressed by Henry VIII on his deathbed. Not far away is Harewood House. It's the home of the Lassells family, an ancestor of which, John Lassells, blew the gaff on Catherine Howard, the King's 5th wife, but was later culled himself in the purge of evangelicals during that dreadful monarch's last years. I watched 2 of the now well-established red kites tumbling above the sky above the Harewood estate, home these days to Emmerdale, that hotbed of the lust, murder and arson so typical of rural North Yorkshire. I never know whether to call it, the family call it Harwood, and the village has always been called Harewood. When I used to go hiking with my parents, when I was little, we always knew it as Harewood. Watch 5 minutes of Have I Got News for You, with Nigel Farage, the guest, and Ian Hislop and Paul Merton, their usual genial selves. I never quite understand why they're so happy to sit on a panel with Farage, Boris Johnson, Jeremy Clarkson et al. Their reasoning would, I imagine, be that this gives them the opportunity to have fun at the expense of Farage and co., and so they do. But the impression an audience comes away with is that actually nothing much matters, and that these seemingly jokey demagogues are human and harmless, and that their opinions are not really as pernicious as their opponents pretend. And even if they are, what does it matter? as politics is just a con anyway. Whereas Johnson, the biker part, doesn't seem to me to have a moral bone in his body, and the batrachoidal Farage likewise. So where's your sense of humour? It's only a joke. Batrachoidal means frog-like. There isn't much about politics included, lest I be thought an old git. But anyway, there's a bit about the elections in 2015. May 9th, my birthday. A nice woman in a leopard skin coat, who always speaks, wishes me a happy birthday. I say that I wish it was. Why, what's happened? Last Thursday, the election. Oh, you don't want to worry about that. They're all the same. At which point, we're in Shepherd's, the grocer's. I hear myself, as very rarely, shouting at the top of my voice. No, they are not all the same. This lot are self-seeking liars, the cabinet included, and we're landed with them for another 5 years. She tries to calm me down, but I tell her not to bother, with other customers peeping round the shelves to see who's making all this din. She's waiting outside the shop with a cake she's bought me for my birthday, and I kind of apologise. But as I walk back home, I wonder how long it will be before this crew turn their attention to the BBC. I read somewhere that the Romans used to crucify tigers to discourage others of their species from preying on humankind. On much the same principle, though less epically, gamekeepers nailed up the carcasses of crows and moles. Nobody, so far anyway, has suggested nailing up the cold carcasses of badgers, though it might be as effective as what DEFRA is doing already. 2015. Around 7, Rupert shouts upstairs, "Look out on the lawn, now." I look out of the bedroom window, and there's something on the grass, but I don't at first even recognise it as a bird. Then it becomes plain it's a hawk, which has brought down an unspecifiable bird, which is still feebly fluttering as the hawk rips into it. What is strange is that the hawk, possibly in order to give it purchase for its pecking, is spreading its wings over its prey and as it were cloaking it from view, though never letting up from tearing strips off the now dead bird. Eventually Rupert opens the back door, and the hawk, a white flash on its breast, flies off with, Rupert thinks, a blackbird in pursuit. All that it leaves on the grass is a smear and some feathers. Everything else, beak, claws, legs, has been eaten. It's something neither of us has ever seen before, leaving us untalkative and slightly shocked. I published an extract from my diary at the end of the year, and this in the London Review of Books, and people often write about entries, and various people wrote informing me that the hawk spreading its wings over its prey is called mantling, which I didn't know. June 2007. The Royal Festival Hall reopens. About a month after its unveiling in 1951, a party from my school in Leeds went down by overnight bus to the Festival of Britain, where in the morning we went to a brief concert at the Festival Hall, such events taking place regularly throughout the day, as well as at night, in order to show off both the architecture and the acoustics. I thought then, aged 17, that it was the most exciting building I'd ever been in. Playful, inventive, the only experience that compared with it in wonder when I went as a child of 5 round the grotto at Hitchin's department store in Leeds to see Santa Claus. The music we heard that morning was pretty undemanding, kicking off with the overture to Susanna's Secret by Wolf Ferrari, followed by whole St. Paul's Suite. Through the concerts I regularly went to at Leeds Town Hall, I was a fairly sophisticated music lover, and when the master in charge, the aptly named Mr. Boer, said that he didn't go for all this highbrow stuff, it was a small lesson that older wasn't necessarily going to mean wiser. The next time I was in the Royal Festival Hall was 18 months later, when I was already in the army. Then it was Brahms' First Symphony, and one came out afterwards not onto the enchanted esplanade and playful promenades of 1951, but to acres of mud and destruction. Churchill, in a for him rare instance of political spite, had the whole site razed to the ground. Socialism must not be seen to be fun. Jonathan Miller, who died, I suppose now nearly 3 years ago, was my neighbour, and he was a good neighbour, if only by default. He often ranged the Crescent on the lookout for someone to talk to, thus incidentally noticing anything untoward. Today it's 2 men who go into my garden while their companion, a woman, waits outside the gate. They're actually having a pee, and when Jonathan remonstrates on my behalf, they turn out to be Australian. One of them apologises, but the other is unrepentant, complaining that you pums are too fixated on the penis, and what does it matter urinating in public? As for the garden, it will act as fertiliser. Jonathan unwisely tries to put the discussion on a higher plane, pointing out that there are issues of public decorum here, and saying that so far as his genitals are concerned, the Australian in question presumably wouldn't be happy walking down the Crescent with his trousers down. Oh, yes, I would. And to prove the point, he drops his shorts to reveal a substantial dick, which he displays to the doctor and anyone else passing. And what, persists Jonathan, would your girlfriend think? Oh, I'd be quite happy, says the girl, the dick in question presumably the source of some happiness already. Jonathan considers taking the argument about public decency a step further and instancing the work of Norbert Elias, the philosopher, but thinks better of it. And the Australians, who are possibly in a bad mood because, unknown to Jonathan, they've just lost the test match, go on their way. There's another Jonathan anecdote. Jehovah's Witnesses blitz the street, and when they ring the bell, I lie on the floor until the coast is clear. I imagine they're used to this sort of response, and even when someone is unwary enough to open them the door, the exchange is generally pretty curt. In one house in the street, though, they're assured of a warmer welcome, as Jonathan Miller is never wont to turn down the chance of a debate and likes nothing better than a brisk canter through the arguments against the existence of God and the literal truth of the Bible. 2 hapless evangelists have just had half an hour of this and were staggering down the steps, licking their wounds, when they spotted, parked in the street, a Ferrari. In some relief, they were admiring this superb machine, not realizing that the scourge of God still had his eye upon them. And you shouldn't be looking at that, Jonathan calls from the porch. That's things of this world. You should be above that. Settle is the next little town to us in Yorkshire. A child in Settle is said to have asked what the mafia was, and his grandfather said, "It's like the Settle Rotary Club, only with guns." We have mice. This is in Yorkshire. The result of Rupert leaving a bag of grass seed in the cupboard under the stairs and tempting in some migrants from next door. Occasionally in winter we've had field mice and even on one occasion dormice, but have taken care to restore them to their natural habitat. But these are dark, small house mice, and so fast-moving they're hard to see. There's movement, but what of? So mice goes down on the Settle shopping list, where there are 2 hardware shops. Practically anything in the marketplace is just that, an Aladdin's cave of household goods, pots, pans, buckets and brushes and gadgets of every description, all very low priced, but no poison. Tom, who keeps the shop, doesn't approve, but doesn't have any humane traps in stock either. So that sends us to Ashfield, the more ordered and professional hardware store on the car park. Indeed, when I ask for a mousetrap, the oldest assistant, now in his 80s, says, "Follow me to the mouse department." And we are taken to 3 shelves stacked with every type of rodent eliminator. We get a humane trap and some poison on the principle that if the mouse doesn't take the sensible option and allow itself to be caught and transported, it deserves all it gets. "Does this put them to sleep?" I ask. The assistant pats my hand. "We like to think so." And of course what it is, with no overtones whatsoever, is sheer camp. That's what makes it a nice shop to go into, and which oils the commercial wheels. Camp. This is a longer entry, harking back to the war. Yorkshire. Asked to provide a foreword for a book of oral history put together by the people of the next village to ours, Orstwick. I'm expecting it to be a bit of a chore, but the histories turn out to be funny and interesting, with the memoirs vivid and specific, particularly about the Second War, which for many of these villagers was the time of their lives. At the centre of this book is an extraordinary adventure when, in the early hours of Monday 9th of June 1941, the pilot of an RAF Whitley bomber returning from a raid over Dortmund got lost crossing the Pennines and, running out of fuel, had to make an emergency landing. Though it was the height of summer and should have been quite light, there was fog and cloud, and the terrain is hilly and indeed mountainous, with the only flat land in the valley bottom crisscrossed with dry stone walls. Miraculously, there was a gap in the cloud, and the pilot brought his plane down safely, coming to rest at Orkaba Farm near Orstwick. Thereafter it was like a scene from an Ealing comedy. Not knowing if the plane were British or German, one of the Home Guard with his rifle came running across the fields, followed by a farmer with a pitchfork, and once the news got round, the entire village. None of the children went to school, ferrying each other on their backs to the landing place, the village policeman failing to rise to the occasion, riding after them, shouting, "Stop, stop! 2 on a bike! 2 on a bike!" Preparations went on all day to get the plane up again. Dry stone walls were taken down, trees felled and gates widened, and the plane was stripped out and refuelled. If If it was a miracle that the plane had got down, it was even more so that it got up again, taking off in the late afternoon and just clearing the trees at the end of the field. A plane crash might have meant a sad plaque in the village, like the several memorials to crashed aircraft that are up on the moors. Instead, it was an idyllic and extraordinary day that Austwick has remembered ever since. And today, at the annual street market, I talked to two of the boys, now in their 80s, whom the policeman had chased for being two on a bike. The pilot's name was Cheshire, and he was the brother of Leonard Cheshire, who was part of the crew that dropped the bomb on Hiroshima, and later, in a sort of expiation, founded the Cheshire Homes. I wrote one or two things about spies, and it just happened that in the next village, Anthony Blunt, the keeper of the Queen's Pictures, his two sisters, lived in the same village, and so they made a great deal of their connection, but less so when it was he was found to have been a spy. I found Blunt not as the really repellent spy was Philby. Blunt was very funny for a start. Long before his disgrace, Blunt was at one of the many parties he gave at the Courtauld Institute, where at one point a colleague saw him coming on to a female companion. Later on in the proceedings, she saw him on the same sofa, but now embracing a young man. He caught her eye. "Oh, Anthony," she said, "you're so fickle." "It's true," said Blunt, "but remember, many a fickle makes a puckle." And I have on the same page, I don't know why I know why it is, because it was coming back from Austwick. I went to the village shop and heard a woman say, there'd been a lot of lightning in London for some reason, which we hadn't had in Yorkshire. And this woman said, "Oh, I do like it when they have it nasty down south." And that's why all the sort of pompous talk about north-south divide is pointless. And this is the final entry before the Q&A. When we go up on the train to Leeds, I'll generally sit in the same seat, often in front of the same businessman, who must also be a creature of habit. We chat, though without really knowing one another, and today, as we're getting out at Leeds, he tells me that he's been staying with friends in East Anglia. He had mentioned that he often sees me on the train, whereupon his hosts had looked rather sheepish. It turns out that at their work office or whatever, they have a sweepstake to which they contribute every month, with the participants drawing various well-known names from a hat, the winner being the one whose name notable is the first to die. I am one of their names. They haven't had a win for some time. Their last bonanza coming with the death of Spike Milligan, who died in an otherwise fallow period, so the pot has grown quite large, which it isn't always. If two names die within a month or two of each other, when the pot hasn't had time to accumulate, the winner will only get a small sum. I laugh about this when he tells me, but I find it depressing to think that even in a light-hearted way there is at least one family in the kingdom waiting, if not longing, for my death. I don't know what the monthly contribution amounts to, but were it substantial, I suppose a game like this might even lead to murder, even if it's only a murder such as occurs in Midsummer. Anyway, so now when I was at university, I did medieval history, and my subject was Richard II, and I only ever did one paper on it, and I had to read it to an academic society who listened to it in utter silence, and at the end I said, are there any questions? And there was an endless silence, and then eventually an undergraduate at the back put his hand rather timidly up and said, "Can you tell me where you got your shoes?" And I think it was at that point I realised I wasn't destined for medieval history.
So we've got a roving mic, which Lily is going to move around with. So if anyone has a question, please put up your hand and Lily will get the mic to you. Yeah.
Hello. Oh yeah, it does work. Thank you. I've got a question about impressions, I guess. A few years ago, my grandfather died, and at the funeral, I was to give the eulogy, and my dad leaned over, knowing I was a fan of your work, and said, "Don't do it as Alan Bennett." And I just know, probably more than a lot of writers, there are on stage and screen, there are people playing you, and impressions of you abound, really. And I wondered how you felt about those impressions and how you feel when you see them. I suppose Alex Jennings is more nuanced than an impression, but I wondered how you felt watching those things.
Yeah, so he was saying that you're someone who, there are a lot of impressions made of you and actors play you, Alex Jennings in particular, and he wondered how you feel when you see, for example, Alex Jennings playing you on stage.
I mean, I didn't mind. I mean, I was very flattered. I felt I could do it better than him, but sometimes I think the is it spitting the radio?
Dead ringers.
That's much more convincing, really, when you hear we hear the imitation there. But Alex, to begin with, he looked, because of the hair, it looked unnatural on him, I thought, but I kept my thoughts to myself, really.
Hello. You referred to the North-South divide, and I just wondered whether you saw your humour as being characteristically northern. As an exiled northerner myself, I'm from Bradford. It does to me, and it has all sorts of resonances with my relatives, which has been a great comfort for me in my exile down south over the years, and thank you for that. But it sounds from what you said, you sort of don't really recognise that division between north and south.
She was asking, do you find your humour to be particularly northern, or are you very aware of the north-south divide, or Yeah, I think that's the question.
I don't find it my own humour is particularly northern. My mum and dad, my dad particularly, I think it probably because of being in a shop, he had a very northern sense of humour, and also he expressed himself very well. There's a character in Victoria Wood's in the people she regularly used Duncan Preston, and he has a way of speaking which is so northern and which nobody else that I can think of actually has ever caught. Quite literate and quite elaborate, and obviously taking pleasure in language, and that's a kind of northern speech which I think I'm afraid is dying out. I think now, but I hope that comes some way to answering your question.
Thank you so much for your reading. I just wanted to ask, you've created so many characters over the years. I don't know if you think of your writing this way, but do you have a particular favourite or one you're especially fond of?
Of all your characters that you've created, do you have a particular favourite?
Well, it's hard to split them from the people who play them. I mean, my first instinct is to say Maggie Smith, both in anything that she's done of mine, and because she can actually show you what you've written, which not all that many actors can. I like Patricia Routledge, but she seems to me rather broader than well, certainly than Maggie. What I like is an actor who can be almost in the same sentence funny and sad, and that's what she can do. Maggie Smith can do, and you can't pin it down, and I don't know anybody else really who can do it in a way that she can. I hope that's not an unsatisfactory answer, but anyway.
The question was also if you have a favourite character, someone you've created.
Well, I like the character that she plays, the vicar's wife who doesn't believe in God. I'm trying to think. You don't have favourites, because if you had favourites, it means you're neglecting the others, as it were. I mean, people would say Thora Hird, but you didn't have to do anything with Thora. She did it. She was such a strong character herself that anything you wrote for her was almost superfluous, really.
The second line of your Wikipedia page says, over his entertainment career, Alan Bennett has won many awards. And I thought that was an incredibly crass way of describing your astonishing body of work. But you've done it all very entertainingly, as indeed you have been tonight. How do you feel about describing your life's career as an entertainment career?
Well, I don't mind, but I know what you mean. I wouldn't describe it like that, but then I don't know how I would describe it really. And I'm gratified that you feel that, and I hope there are lots of other people who feel the same way. But in the end, it doesn't matter really. It means you have to think about what your reputation is going to be like when you've gone, and one's reluctant to do that.
I think we've probably just got time for one more.
Well, thank you so much for your entertainment career and for this evening. I wondered, what did you like to read when you were a boy? And when it comes to the influence on your wonderful writing, was it more important what you read or what you heard when you were a child?
So that's a question about what you read as a child, and what was the favourite thing you read as a child, and was the influence more things that you had heard or read on your later work? Something like that.
The thing that I remember as a child, I read quite early, and we for a year in my young life, my mum and dad always thought that life down south, as they put it, was better, and so my father would always work for the co-op, gave up his job and got a job with a private butcher in Guildford. So we lived for a year in Guildford. And what I remember about Guildford, I liked it because it was so near. I'd never been in a place where you could walk and a mile and you'd be in the country. But what I remember about Guildford as a child was going to a private library. There were private libraries then. I mean, Boots is a famous one, but I mean, even tiny shops sometimes had collections of books. And there was this shop which had all the William books. And I loved William because there was always one more. You never came to the end of them. Martin Jarvis is wonderful reading William books. He gets it absolutely right. But I don't know whether he has ever come to the end of them. But I think I felt I was a failure in that I wasn't like William, which I quite plainly wasn't. I was a rather timid child. So I don't know whether it's a good thing, really, to have been so impressed. But I still delight in hearing him read them. They are wonderful books.
So I think Alan's now going to do a final reading, and
it's slightly the question about my childhood, and this is about my childhood really. When I was about 10, on Saturday afternoons, I used to go down. We lived in Armley in Leeds, which isn't by any means posh, but it was rather posher than where my grandma lived. And she lived in Wortley. And as a child, I would go down to Wortley and to spend the afternoon with my grandma. she would sit by the fire, by the kitchen fire, and I would very often just be in the much posher, that's in the kitchen, and I would be in the much posher sitting room, rooting. That's what my grandma called it, rooting. Are you rooting? And rooting was just going through the sideboard and all the accumulated stuff in the sideboard, which were letters and postcards, and also the box with commemorating my uncle, who I never knew, who was killed in the First War, and there was always something I liked, and also there was a copy of Forever Amber, which was bound in or backed in brown paper, which belonged to my Auntie Kathleen, and it was backed in brown paper because she was conscious of it being a rather dirty book. Anyway, this entry is to do really with that and with the time with my grandma, and she would sit by the fire, and then around 4:30, the Evening Post would force its way through the letterbox. It had to force its way because there was a huge mound of coats behind the door, and then she would read out from the Evening Post the items that caught her eye. Bradford gripped by bread hysteria. Pensioner cleared of tea cake theft. I see the president of Romania's mother's dead. There's always trouble for somebody. And then the ritual always ended in the same way, with her reading out the in memoriams, which were chosen from a big black book on the offices on Commercial Street, and altered, not always successfully, to the requirements of the deceased. Down the lanes of memory, the lights are never dim. Until the stars forget to shine, we shall remember her. Anyway, but all this took place in front of the mantelpiece, which in a play which didn't do at all well, called Enjoy, which was the first time I ever wrote about the North for the stage. I described this mantelpiece, and that's what this speech is. One clock in Light Oak, presented to Mum's father after 40 years with Greenwood and Batley, stopped, the key lost. A wooden candlestick that's never seen a candle. A tube of ointment for a skin complaint that cleared up after one application. An email letter 2 years old announcing the death of a cousin in Perth, Western Australia, the stamp torn off. 2 half-crowns not cashed at decimalisation because Mum read in the Evening Post that one day they would be priceless. 4 old halfpennies kept on the same principle. A dry biro. Various reminders on the backs of envelopes. Pension Thursday. Dad's pills. Gone down the road, dinner on. And starkly, gas. A rubber band. 3 plastic clips from the package of a new shirt, kept by Dad with the idea it'll save wasting money on paper clips. Not that he ever does waste money on paper clips. 3 twopenny halfpenny stamps. A packet of nasturtium seeds on offer with some custard powder. A newspaper cutting recording the conviction for shoplifting of the wife of the local vicar, safe to send to relatives in Canada. Dad's last appointment card at the infirmary and 2 grey aspirins. Altar, notice board, medicine chest, cemetery. A shrine laden with the relics of the recent past and a testimonial to the faith that one day the world will turn and the past come back into its own and there will be a restoration. The coinage will make sense once more, letters again cost 2 halfpenny, and life return to its old ways. On that day the nasturtiums will be planted, the half-crown spent, the skin complaint will recur, and the ointment be applied once more to the affected part. The barrow will flow again. The second cousin in Toronto will be informed at last of the conviction of the vicar's wife, and on that day the key will be found and the clock strike. I won't stand up in case I fall over.
Alan, that was unbelievably great. Thank you so much. So there are books for sale over there, signed book plates to accompany them. And yeah, just thank you for a really amazing hour. It's hard to say quite how enjoyable it was for all of us listening. So thank you, and please come again.